11 o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you. Hope you guys had a great Easter weekend. Also, happy April Fool's Day. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, don't believe everything that you read on the internet today because it's probably not true.
Do y'all participate in April Fool's Day?
I used to. So I was telling my wife about this morning. When I was a kid, my sister and I had the same joke every single year where we take a rubber band and we put it around the little like spray thing next to the sink because our mom inevitably would be the first one to turn on the sink in the morning and we get her to spray water all over herself. Pretty harmless at the end of the day, but that was kind of a recurring joke we did every single year. But that's about the extent of April Fools I think I've ever done in my life.
The worst one I ever had played on me was by my wife.
Oh, what'd you do?
She hid the coffee.
Oh no!
Morning. Yeah, so and she was like, "No, we're out. I mean, we don't have any." So I'm like, "Well, got to go to the store and get coffee." And that was, I mean, it. I know that doesn't sound bad, but it was, especially at the time, I needed some coffee.
I say when it's a vital part of functioning every single day, that's pretty important.
For me, it is, unfortunately. So, but we're good today.
How about you, Wes? Any April Fools?
I'm just laughing at how upset Chris probably was about this coffee.
You can visualize.
Yeah, I can see it. Chris is a coffee drinker for one, and he's one of those. I don't need any creamer or sugar.
No,
just black,
very low maintenance,
manly.
But it better be there. Like when we think about going somewhere, I'm like, and like if we're staying with somebody, I'm like, all right, well, is there going to be coffee in the morning?
You have to assess the coffee situation.
Yeah, is there access to coffee somehow?
That's right. Because Chris laughs at us when we get when Josh brings us coffee when we're out doing stuff, and we have
I get bougie coffee.
I get like a caramel latte, and Chris or Wes gets like something kind of bougie mocha latte, and
those are good though.
Chris is just
Wes has gotten me.
Chris is just the manly one of us with the black coffee over there.
The people who drink black coffee. It's kind of like people who do CrossFit. Like, how do you know they do CrossFit?
They tell you.
They'll tell you.
Well, I'll say
same exact thing.
I'll say that Chris has not made drinking black coffee his personality, so I'll give him that because some people do.
Yes,
that's true. That's true.
True. But no, I'm not. I enjoy a good April Fool's joke if it's like. I feel like it's harder and harder.
Sure.
To do a good one because everybody's on edge today. Well, On 3 announced huge news today that Steve Wiltfong has joined from 24/7 Sports, and people are like, wait, is this April Fool's?
It's not real. Yeah,
you're skeptical of everything. I did see FAU in South Florida put out a tweet about playing a football game on an aircraft carrier, which is something I've advocated for a long time. I got excited for about half a second, then I was like, oh, that's right, April 1st. Dang, maybe next time.
And they had a graphic to go along with it.
They did, it looked legit.
So, to me, at this point, the best April Fool's jokes are the ones that are so insane that you're like, okay, that's pretty funny. It's pretty good, right? Like actual, like when people put what could actually be news and then it's April Fool's, I'm like, nah, that's kind of lame. But if it's something like that where it does take you, like after a split second, though, you're like,
oh, that's not real.
You're like, that's not real, but
man,
hilarious.
I would love that. That'd be so great. Well, what's not a joke is South Carolina women's basketball going to another Final Four, the fourth one in a row, taking down Indiana and Oregon State over the weekend. And, it's just almost become the expectation for this program. Though, going into the season, had a lot of questions, didn't really know how the team was going to turn out with so many, key factors being gone from a season ago. But here they are, still undefeated, still the number one team in the country, and getting a chance to win 2 more games and win another national championship.
Yeah, and we say it every step of the way at this point. Don't take this for granted. It's like it's not supposed to be this easy. Not that it is easy for the girls themselves. I mean, they obviously work incredibly hard to get to where they're at right now. Just because you're talented, which they all are, doesn't mean that it's easy. And this group, they've done it their way. And as Dawn Staley has so eloquently put, at times you get reminders that they are young. They're still young. And, they have fun with it. They are in a situation where there are some ups and downs within individual games, as we saw with Indiana. But, that actually, I think it's easy to forget that was a really good Indiana team as well. And I actually came across, I didn't realize this at the time, but I came across a graphic. You know, Twitter these days just shows you stuff from like decades ago, it feels like. But it was one of those things where it showed me something from last week, and it was through the first 2 rounds, which team what's the average margin of victory? And obviously South Carolina was first. And it was like South Carolina, I think it was South Carolina, Texas, Southern Cal. It was all 1 seeds. And then the 4th team on there was 4 seed Indiana. And so, you know, they came in and they were game for South Carolina. And yeah, South Carolina let a lead slip away, but at the same time, I think we got to give credit to Indiana for what they were doing. And, you know, we talked about the game, and I sat right here and was like, you know, unless somebody for Indiana just goes off from 3 and just hits everything, then I think South Carolina should win this fairly handily. But Indiana did have I mean, they got hot. They were hitting their shots from outside, and they never gave up. And you're going to get that in a tournament winner-go-home situation. Nobody's going to give up. Nobody's going to just let you have it, even if you have a 20-point lead. So we saw that from Indiana. Kudos to them. But then South Carolina, it forced them to make some shots late, and they did that.
Yeah, you look at – go back to Indiana, right? I mean, this is a team that beat Iowa by 17 earlier in the season. They got hot. I think if you push it forward to the Oregon State game, that, again, really good team. You look at, okay, margin of victory first 2 rounds versus margin of victory in the next 2 rounds. I mean, one thing that was pretty obvious is that the quality of the teams that South Carolina was facing went up. You know, Indiana, for my money, much better team than North Carolina. Oregon State, much better team than North Carolina. And Oregon State had some shooters that got hot as well in that game. But it's tough. Like, if you look at South Carolina this year, they still have not lost a game during the regular season. They still haven't lost a game in the tournament, obviously. And I think it goes back to something we've discussed, I think, before the tournament started. The parity in the women's game is a lot more now. Like, I'm not diminishing what UConn did or Tennessee, you know, when they would go undefeated back in the day. But that is a lot harder to do now. A lot harder, because if you've just been watching the tournament, the women's tournament, the games, a lot of them are a lot closer. There's a lot better games, a lot better matchups. There's more parity. And, I mean, if you just go up and down the rankings and the schedules and the win-loss records of every team in college basketball before the tournament started, I mean, teams in the top 10 have 6 losses, 7 losses, 5 losses. And then you got South Carolina there walking into the tournament 32-0. It's not normal. It wasn't normal when UConn and Tennessee were doing it. It's especially, even more so, not normal now. I mean, you had Fairfield. They were 31-1, but they play at a lower level. They got bounced earlier in the tournament. You had, what was the other one? Gonzaga had 2 losses. But other than that, you typically have multiple losses. This team, for them to be able, and you know, hey, they still got to go win a couple more games if they're going to win a title, and it's going to be very difficult to do so because of the competition they're going to be facing. But I just think, man, right now in 2024, we can't lose sight of just how impressive that is, what they've done so far.
Not only that, and, you know, yesterday's win was, I don't want to say a little bit more comfortable because, you know, Oregon State did close it up there to a 4-point game in the last couple of minutes for South Carolina went on the run to close things out 8-0 over the course of those last couple of minutes. But I look at the stats in yesterday's game against Oregon State. South Carolina shot 33% from the floor, 20% from 3, and still won the game by 12 points. So they didn't play their best game, but were still able to beat legitimately one of the best teams in the country in Oregon State, who had to get past a very good Notre Dame team on Friday that South Carolina had played earlier on the season, and they still found a way to win. Like, I think that speaks volumes to just how good and how deep this team is to not have your best game and still win like that.
Well, we've been saying that multiple times this year. I mean, typically a team has a poor game, or not even poor, like not your A game, a C game, and they lose. One reason being that parity, right? When you play in the Elite Eight, men's or women's game, any sport, like if you're down to the last 8 teams, if you don't play well, typically you lose because the other team is good enough to make you pay. And Oregon State and Indiana were good enough to make you pay, but South Carolina is just still that much better. I saw Shanae Agunwake said in an appearance. Not on the SEC Network, but she
nailed that name, by the way.
thank you.
Good
I
job.
appreciate that. I do try. She said, look, South Carolina's biggest threat is South Carolina, and I think she has a good point. You know, and you say this all the time, Wes, when they play their A game, they're hard to beat. I think the question is, once they get to the Final Four in NC State, do they have to be a little bit sharper than we've seen the last 2 rounds? Probably so, to win.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's funny how quickly we kind of change our expectations. And with this group, you know, with last year's group, it kind of felt like title or bust. And then you have so much turnover with the roster. And then you see what they do right off the bat against Notre Dame. And then they go undefeated again. The conversations right after the bracket was announced, literally on ESPN, they're having conversations about, do you take South Carolina or do you take the field? Like, think about that for a second.
Sure.
This is a completely new team than the one last year, and already you're going to have a narrative that it's championship or bust. And frankly, I sit there and watch it, and it's like, you watch a South Carolina game, and if it's a 7-point game in the fourth quarter, and South Carolina's up by 7, you're like, whew, tight game.
Oh, boy.
It's a close game here. And it's like, all right, if I was watching any other basketball game and a team had a 7-point fourth quarter lead, I'd be like, okay, you know, they've got a decent lead here.
Sure.
So the expectations are almost out of whack, I think. Like, we haven't seen what South Carolina – like, South Carolina has not played NC State this year. We're going to find out on Friday. And NC State, they're playing their best basketball right now, obviously. We haven't seen South Carolina against the other USC, against Southern Cal. We don't know what that matchup looks like. Obviously, we have seen them play and beat LSU twice. We haven't seen them play Iowa this year. So it's not a God-given right that they're going to just win the title. And it's really, truly, honestly – from a Vegas standpoint, maybe it is, but it's not really necessarily an upset if this group doesn't win the whole thing. You still have to go play the games. And these other teams, I think what we're seeing, I mean, these other teams, and I didn't, who else is it? UConn is still in the mix.
Yep. Southern Cal, Iowa, LSU.
Yeah, so these other teams, like you look, I thought this was somewhat almost hilarious. But ESPN put out, this was going into the Sweet 16, top 25 players in the Sweet 16.
Yeah.
The top 9 don't wear garnet and black, which I think speaks to, like, if you're a Gamecock fan, you can have an argument that that's ridiculous, but also it speaks to the balance of the South Carolina roster.
Not only that, I feel like South Carolina might be flying under the radar a little bit. In fact, Don Staley talked about that yesterday after the win against Oregon State. We'll hit that coming up, get some reactions to that as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls on. Want to remind you real quick, as always, you can watch us on the Game TV, sponsored by our friends over at Shepherd's Glass, as well as check us out on the 107.5 The Game app. Just head to the iTunes App Store or the Google Play Store, give us a download, and listen to us wherever you go around the state, around the country, around the world, the 107.5 The Game app. Dawn Saylor's reaction to her team maybe flying under the radar. Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you on your Monday, reacting to everything that happened over the weekend with basketball, both men's and women's. Of course, the women punching their ticket to yet another Final Four. Despite being the lone undefeated team in the country, and they have been for a while, the number one team in the country, as they have been pretty much all season long. In a way, it kind of feels like, from at least a national standpoint, South Carolina might be flying under the radar a little bit heading into the Final Four this upcoming weekend in Cleveland. In fact, Dawn Staley was asked about that yesterday after the win over Oregon State. Here's what she had to say.
I don't know, but I like it. I really do. Like, go ahead. Take the spotlight, put it somewhere else. You know, let this team continue to thrive in the space that they're given. And hopefully at the end of the day, next week this time, I'm hoping that we give a lot of people a lot to talk about. But it's like that, you know. I mean, I'm looking forward to tomorrow night's game. Now that we've won, I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna enjoy it like everybody else. Like, probably millions and millions of people are gonna tune into that game. I'm gonna be one of them. I don't have a Nielsen ratings in my house, but you can count me in to watch the game tomorrow night.
And when you talk about the national conversation that's gone on around women's basketball as late, like, yes, everyone is aware of South Carolina, what they've been doing, but it hasn't been the top headline. It's been what's going on with Caitlin Clark setting a bunch of records. It's been the saga of LSU. And, you know, last week we talked about Kim Mulkey in this article that ended up kind of being disappointed, if we're being honest with each other, that ended up coming out on Saturday. But, you know, so many headlines not revolving around the best team in the country. And as Dawn Staley mentioned there, she kind of likes it that way. It's a way of providing a chip on the shoulder for this team that, you know, otherwise may be hard to find one. And, you know, can kind of going into this Final Four weekend not being looked at with the same microscope as some of these other teams.
Yeah, and all the hype about the Kent Babb article, we got actually more talk about a different article over the weekend. So there's been storylines, man. There's been some good storylines. There's been some shaking my head storylines, I would say. You can't, for one, all right, we got all this great basketball, y'all, and it's been really good. Like, this is the most I have watched of the women's tournament.
It's been fun.
Other than South Carolina, like, I would always be watching South Carolina is what I'm trying to say. But
sure, the
fact that I was cutting grass on Saturday, but made it a point to go watch the LSU game and, like, kind of worked my day around that too. I think it's been very entertaining. So NCAA, like, we gotta get our stuff together for the NCAA women's tournament. Like, I know we've made some strides in that area, but we can't have the court different lengths as far as the 3-point line for
an Elite Eight game.
A freaking Elite Eight game. Well, really for the games before that, too. Like,
they just didn't notice it till yesterday.
How? So, hopefully, lots of other people around the women's game will catch up with the actual on-court ability and talent. Like, we should not be talking about that. That's insane to me. But the actual, you know, and this goes back to what I was talking about before, this list from ESPN, again, this was going into Sweet 16, top 25 players who are in the Sweet 16 for women's basketball, top 9, none of them on South Carolina's team. But you do have, and obviously these teams are built a little bit differently than South Carolina. South Carolina's more about balance.
Sure.
You have some superstars, though, that people are tuning in to watch with these other games as well. And because we all love superstars, and it makes for a very easy storyline for national media as well, there has been some attention on these other schools, these other teams that maybe draws away a bit from South Carolina. But if you're a young team, I mean, Dawn Staley, she didn't hold back. She said it herself. She's loving that. She's okay with that. But
absolutely,
obviously, they got Caitlin Clark first. I think you can make some arguments about the order of this thing. Who would y'all have second? Have y'all seen the article?
I haven't.
Who's second off the top of your head? It's not who I would have thought.
Maybe Juju Watkins.
That's who I would have said. It's Paige Beckers.
Oh, okay.
She's two.
I mean, good argument there. Very good player
good
himself.
Argument. And UConn also flying under the radar a little bit.
That's true.
They've been to like 800 straight, you know, Elite Eights or whatever it is. And it's like, UConn. They're just not a factor.
They had Juju 3, Hannah Hidalgo 4, which, again, that's another why are we sitting there talking about the girl's nose ring
Yeah.
that she apparently has worn all year long?
Oh, yeah.
And now it's a thing. That shouldn't be happening. Shouldn't be the discussion. Madison Booker 5, Cameron Brink 6, Aaliyah Edwards 7, Angel Reese 8. Go all the way down to 10. Malaysia Fulwiley.
Where's Cardoso?
Oh.
Cardoso 11.
Yeah. I mean, if you're South Carolina, you're loving this. No problem. Just like Dawn said. I mean, you fly under the radar. Who cares?
And I'm not sitting here just saying this list is awful, because I think it just, to me, speaks to the number of superstars. Like, if you're South Carolina, if you're gonna win a title this year, like, you've got to go through a gauntlet. Like, this is, I know everybody expects you to go in and win every game by 15, but that's just not realistic anymore. Like, there's talent throughout the upper levels of women's basketball. And so whether it's you directly beating them, or, Iowa and LSU having to go through one another, and one's going to be eliminated tonight, I mean, it's fun. And, I mean, NC State, don't get fooled by that 3 by their name. I mean, they are playing as good a basketball as anybody right now, I think.
Just like the NC State men's team sitting there at an 11, they're playing incredible.
It's a good time to be in Raleigh right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're having fun.
Rock Hill's finest, DJ
Right.
Burns.
That's right.
DJ Burns also drawing NFL interest, apparently. I mean, legit, like Jim Nagy from the Reese Senior Bowl saying, like, I've got GMs texting me about DJ Burns, making him a left tackle. But he has kind of, as the tournament has gone along and they didn't get bounced in the first round, like, people are seeing, oh, man, this kid's fun. He's a unique player.
He's become the darling of March Madness.
And he's played great. He's a unique player. His passing ability and his personality, right? And just his presentation overall, he's just a very unique player.
Just likes to have fun.
But there are, I mean, to your point, Wes, there's really good players in the women's games, and you got some kind of more bombastic personalities, which I think helps, like an Angel Reese.
Sure.
But that does tend to overshadow a little bit kind of the more workmanlike nature of South Carolina's team, the more, Malaysia Fulwiley, very flashy player. But maybe the personality, like, she's not Angel Reese with the way that she talks. That's how South Carolina operates, and it's worked extremely well for them.
Well, they're not built around one player either. A lot of these teams are built around, maybe not, one player is probably not fair. A lot of these teams, I feel like, are built around 2 players.
1 to 2. Yep.
Now LSU, Flau'jae Johnson, she's 24 on this list. The way she played, especially, the way she played on Saturday, I mean, she was playing like a top 10 player, in the country. So she'll have to continue to do that. But the last 2 games, she's been fantastic. So I think, but just the fact that you could sit here and reorder this list and probably still be fairly, like, you can make an argument. I just think I'm more saying it speaks to the talent, as opposed to even that South Carolina fans should have some great beef with this list.
For sure. We'll continue this conversation. Also, if you're on the Lev Chevrolet phone lines, hang on. We'll get to you on the other side as we continue to react to the weekend that was in basketball. South Carolina punching their ticket to another Final Four with the women coming up this weekend out there in Cleveland. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
And as you watch the outstanding basketball and sports action this weekend, make sure that you have an outstanding setup from an audiovisual standpoint at your home, at your business, or anywhere that you may be. In order to take full advantage of what's going on in sports right now, you want to make sure that you have number one, a great internet setup. You don't want to get that streaming circle of death where your devices are buffering. You probably got multiple devices running at your home at once. Maybe you got some dead spots. You say, man, I can't have a TV here because it won't pick up signal. I can't take my tablet or my phone out here because it's buffering, not picking up the right signal. The folks at Integrated Media can help you with that and so much more, whether it's the equipment. They can do that for you. They can source it. You don't have to go to the big box stores. They can help you pick out what is best, and they can install it for you and make sure it is working to the maximum potential. IntegratedMediaInc.com or 803-948-8327. Michael Nathan at Integrated Media.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Ed, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you. Jump back into the basketball conversation in just a second. Quick reminder, it's a busy week for baseball, taking on Georgia Southern. Coming up Wednesday at 7 o'clock, pregame coverage starting at 6:45 right here on the game. Then Thursday night, you'll be able to hear from Coach Kingston on Carolina Calls at 6 o'clock right here on the game. Head out to the Love Chevrolet phone lines. Lee out in Florence wants to weigh in on the weekend that was for women's basketball. Lee, appreciate your time. What's on your mind this morning?
Hey, guys. How y'all doing today? Hope everyone had a great Easter.
You too.
Just a few observations from the weekend. You know, Dawn Staley actually showed that she actually is a really, really good coach. Because some of the things I was watching when Oklahoma State was playing, how they turned the ball over so many times and how they're having trouble getting the ball up the court. And the first thing that she does was press them starts to press them up on the first quarter. And I thought that was like, she saw the same thing that I saw, that they struggle getting the ball up the court. Next thing is the next team that we play, if we play like we did against Oklahoma State, we're going to get blowed out. Pow got lit up yesterday. She could not defend anybody. I don't know what she can shoot, but her defense is very weak. The other thing is either way, if we make it to the championship game, either one of those games, it's UConn, USC, LSU, or Iowa, all those games are going to be a really good game. It's going to be a tough test for South Carolina to beat UConn twice, to beat LSU 3 times. I'd really like to see them play Iowa again because I really like to see them get revenge on that loss from last year. And one final thing is just listening to the way y'all were talking. It was like you were anticipating a loss or setting us up for a loss. And I know, I mean, if we play our A game, I don't think anybody in the country can beat us, regardless who they are. If we play the way we normally do, and I found myself yesterday, actually, my son said, that's women's basketball. I said, son, you just don't understand the talent. It's not like watching it now because I know who's going to be on the team next year. With the men, you don't know that. But with the women, you know, you got 4 years to watch your. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing Wiley when she's a senior and how good she's going to be. You know, it's just going to be South Carolina's upside is just tremendous. And I'll take it off the air unless you got a question for me.
Now, I appreciate your call there, Lee. And again, you can hit us up 803-404-6100. I don't think we were trying to present that as South Carolina potentially losing this weekend, in the Final Four. I think it's just there was, not their best game yesterday against Oregon State, still found a way to win. And they're not perfect, which, I mean, no team is, even though their record is undefeated at this point. So there are some areas that you do need to be aware of as you head into a matchup against NC State on Friday and potentially in Iowa, LSU, whoever, if you do make it in the national championship on Sunday. He brings up a good point about pressing, especially in that second half against Oregon State yesterday. Another team that shoots the ball very well from the outside. They were 6 of 14 in the first half from 3, only 2 of 11 in the second half. Did make them at critical times. Were able to narrow that margin down to 4 points late in the game against South Carolina's defense. Ends up winning out by shutting them out in about the final 3.5 minutes to 4 minutes of that game yesterday.
Yeah, and no ulterior motives to me pointing out the positives for some of these other teams. I'm just saying it's not going
to be a cakewalk.
It's not a given
that
they're going to win the thing. That's why you go play the games. And so, not setting anybody up for anything. I just think if they win the championship with this young team this year, you will have absolutely earned it, regardless of opponent. I mean, I look at some of these teams, and I'm with him. I want to see an Iowa rematch, but I actually think the Iowa game is not easy, but an easier matchup than some of these other teams for South Carolina. I think South Carolina will beat Iowa by double digits. I think that's I feel fairly strongly about that, actually.
I feel confident about South Carolina potentially matching up with any of these teams. Again, they got to get past NC State on Friday, but regardless of what, if South Carolina can get past that and get to the national championship game, you're obviously going to feel confident in them against anybody. But, man, you have to face LSU for a third time. Beating any team 3 times in the season. We saw how tough it was taking on, Tennessee the other weekend a third time in the SEC championship game. Thankfully, Camila Cardoso with that miracle 3 at the end of the game. But an LSU team as good as they are, a third time, that's a tall ask.
Do y'all believe in the thing about, it's like a cliche, obviously, that beating any team 3 times is difficult?
I think it's not because of the fact that it's the third time, literally. I just think there is some validity in, how we'll say, like, hey, if those 2 teams played 10 times, X team would win 9 or X team would win 6 instead, And so if it's 2 teams that are fairly evenly matched, it's not like the Grand Canyon in between them. It is, typically the more times you play, a team's going to be able to take one of those games. Just kind of averages out. But, I don't think it's just because it's 3 games.
I want to see him play Iowa again, personally.
I think the one thing, and Lee kind of hit on this a little bit with just not one specific player in my mind. I think if you look at the Indiana game and the Oregon State game, they did lose some shooters on ball screens. Now, at some point, like, the other team is going to score. Like, Indiana had, the most efficient offense in the country, I think, coming in.
Yep.
Oregon State has a very good offense. Like, they're there for a reason. So, you're sometimes, like, we have this the opinion of South Carolina is so high, like you said earlier, Wes, that they're in a 7-point game. Oh, my God, they're playing terrible. No, sometimes even teams as dominant as they've been are going to get in legitimate competitive games, and I think that's what they were in. Now, are there some things to clean up that Dawn Staley's looking at going, we've got to get this fixed? I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and say Pow is their best on-ball defender, out of the group they have, but at the same time, this is a team built on playing aggressive man-to-man defense, and when you play like that, a lot of it is built on team defense too, like your help defense. So you're going to aggressively play that person at the top of the key, and sometimes because of that, you're going to get beat. But if you watch South Carolina, if you watch how they flow, if you watch how they will switch screens at times, but then if the other team kind of backs off, how they'll switch back and get back to where they need to be as far as the matchups go. They really do, especially for a young team, which, they're young. They've played all year long, though, at this point, so they have experience. But they do play very strong team defense, I feel like, in terms of helping each other out, and that allows them to be aggressive. And they did, to his point, they went full court at times. We actually saw them come out, play one against UNC, and show some full court. And I think, for one, that just sends a message. And they're not necessarily a full court defense team as part of their identity, but they have so much depth. If you can force another team to have to work for everything they get, and then you're constantly rotating, then that can play in your favor as well if you're South Carolina.
By the way, we haven't even mentioned this, but how about the game for Ashlyn Watkins yesterday after having not her best performance against Indiana on Friday night? Goes out there, 14 rebounds, 5 blocks, living up to the nickname of Ashlyn Swatkins for sure against Oregon State yesterday.
Okay, first of all, chef's kiss, nickname, Swatkins, perfection. Love when that comes together. But it also goes to show you, man, there's so much rotation. There's so much talent. It's going to be a different person from night to night. And she, I believe ESPN picked her as their sponsored player of the game. And so, that just, and I thought, honestly, her or Tessa Johnson probably would have been your player of the game. And Tessa got great minutes down the stretch. And just, it goes to show you, it's kind of like, we talk about, if you have a running back rotation, going with the hot hand on a given day. If you're Dawn Staley, if you're this coaching staff, you don't know who the hot hand is going to be on that given moment, and you don't want to give up on somebody, because we've seen shooters miss their first 5 and then hit their next 5.
Sure.
But you kind of, there is a little bit of pressure in being too deep, and I mean too deep as TOO, not too deep. Because you got to pick the right 5 to 6 kind of rotation down the stretch of a game. If you just have 5 players, if you're Indiana, hey, these are our 5, and we're rolling the 5 out there, and we're just going to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, South Carolina realistically has 2 starting lineups. You can intermix anybody from the bench to the starting 5 and be, not being able to see any fall off there, which we've seen all season long, and it's going to be a big factor this weekend, going up against NC State and then whoever they might see in a potential national championship. So excited for it, and we'll break it down more as the week goes along. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. We opened the show talking about April Fool's Day, and I got a text here of quite a, in my opinion, cruel April Fool's joke that somebody got played this morning. We'll hit that coming up. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you on this Monday morning. We'll try and hit baseball before we get out of here. Real quick, want to remind you about the 107.5 Game Spring Golf Classic coming up on Friday out at Charwood Golf Club in West Columbia. We're all going to be out there. If you want to take part, it's going to be $400 for a foursome, $200 for a pair. 10 a.m. shotgun start. Going to have giveaways, including baseball tickets, Carowin tickets, concert tickets, and much, much more. If you want to take part, give Charwood a call at 803-755-2000 to register. It is April Fool's Day, as we talked about a little bit at the beginning of the show. Chris's wife hiding the coffee from him one year, which was not a nice thing to do by any means. I'm sure you were frustrated that morning. But I got a text here from nameless texter, and he says, my wife made Brussels sprouts look like cake pops for today. And that was her April Fool's joke. That's just cruel.
So like
me.
a Brussels sprout embedded in a cake pop?
Yeah, like I guess you'd put like the icing over it because you wouldn't know the difference. And like that's one of those
smell
things.
The difference?
That well, I guess maybe that would be a
man.
giveaway. But like that's one of those things, especially with food. When you have it in your mind what something's going to taste like, and you bite in or drink something and it tastes completely different, that's just a cruel thing to do.
I think it depends on the relationship too. Like, are these? Is he constantly playing pranks on his wife too?
See, that's what we don't know.
You know what I'm saying? Like
that's a good question.
Some
Good
relationships. Nameless texter. First of all, give your name, man. Second of all,
what did you do to warrant this being done to you? I guess is the better question.
Did you forget to take out the trash today? Like, what happened here?
I think that's funny.
Not buy her candy
I like
on
Brussels
Easter.
sprouts, but not if I'm expecting a cake pop.
Exactly. There's time and place for those kind of things.
Yeah, especially if you feel like your wife's surprised. Oh, cake pops.
Yeah, on April Fool's Day in the morning.
Sweet.
That's a little sus. I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, let us know if you did anything to warrant that before your wife did that to you. But anyway, we wanted to close out here talking a little bit of baseball as we wrap up today's edition of the show. As they were on the road this past weekend out in Tuscaloosa, did start on Thursday. Talked about that game a little bit on Friday, but ended up losing on Saturday, letting things get away from you in the late innings there, with the Alabama scoring 7 runs in the 8th inning on Friday, and then Saturday. I said this a little bit earlier. I thought they had the game well in hand, but silly me, because Alabama came storming back. Heads-up play by Talmadge Leroy, and Will Tippett there at the very end to get that third out on what looked like could be a situation for Alabama to be going in with the bases loaded to potentially blow the game open and pick up a last-second win there on Saturday.
Yeah, heads-up play, like you said, by both Leroy and Tippett. I thought terrible blunder by Alabama, frankly. If you're the tying run, you can't let that happen.
Right.
Like you just can't. And so, but yeah, guys, I see the reactions online. I mean, the amount of just absolute destruction from the fan base after the first 2 games, and yeah, you want to win series, right? But
sure.
So far, I mean, I don't think we know what this team is going to be. Like the SEC grind right now is just a different animal. And I think, yeah, you never want to lose a series, right? But finding a way to win that game on Sunday, and just like we talked about with the trip to Ole Miss, played out the exact same way in a lot of ways. Finding a way to win that, salvage something from the series, not get swept, and not basically delete your sweep of Vandy,
right,
by getting swept yourself. I actually think that was a big win for them. And you mentioned, hey, I thought the game was over for South Carolina, but early in this game, I mean, Bama has a 4-0 lead of their own. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it was a very that was a Sunday SEC baseball game. Sure. Really, you see that happen a lot on Sundays where teams are getting to the end of their pitching, and the ball can just fly. Now, obviously, it was a Saturday this time, but y'all know what I mean. It was a game 3, and so big Bama early lead, big South Carolina late lead, and then of course Bama fought back. And just a heads-up play. I mean, that's the difference in winning and losing. Sometimes it can literally come down to one play like that. And kudos to South Carolina for making the play when it mattered.
I think that people are viewing. Number one, people with baseball, in some regards, if you're frustrated by losing 2 out of 3, I get it. I get that. But I think you do have to realize, like you said, Wes, the SEC grind. So you do have to wait. You got to wait a little. We can't say the season's over. They got no chance. They're not even going to make the postseason. Like, you literally can't make those statements yet. I think some people are viewing maybe some past frustrations, like they're viewing this through that prism. If you think that, okay. But, like, I mean, you look at, like, I don't think anybody's given up on Vandy as a program. South Carolina swept them.
Right.
Vandy's 6-3 right now. What's South Carolina, 5-4?
Yeah, they're 21-7 and 5-4.
They're 5-4. That's still that's not bad, guys. That's not 0-9. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Vandy swept their other two SEC series and got swept by South Carolina. So, like, we do have to wait.
Yeah.
We got to see.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, playing on the road anywhere is obviously going to be very tough, especially when you look at Ole Miss and Tuscaloosa, the two places that you've had to visit so far this season. So that places even more importance on a series like this weekend upcoming against Texas A&M to make sure you handle your business and, you know, don't let one of those slip through your fingers to where you're having to try and make up for that on the road somewhere else as the season goes along. So still in a good position, as you mentioned, 5-4, sitting right now in SEC play. Still early on, still a lot of baseball to be played, but, you know, you just hate that you let Thursday's game kind of slip through your fingers, or you could have walked out of Tuscaloosa